Hi gang, Armageddon is once again in the spotlight of Warhammer 40k, the focus of the latest narrative campaign. But Armageddon is a world that suffered numerous giant and well-publicised campaigns, and more than a few that are far less well known. So let's look back through the cobwebs of Warhammer lore and summarise the many wars for Armageddon. Check out the store for new merch. You can read your Warhammer books while drinking from one of our arbitorian mugs. Details in the thing below. So Armageddon has been a major war front of the 41st millennium for decades now, ever since the second edition of Warhammer 40k all the way back in the 1990s. The subject of numerous invasions, wars and revolutions that have spawned campaign supplements, novel series, and the backstories for main characters. Both Gazgakul, Thraka and Commissar Yarrick had their beginnings here, and like all big Warhammer 40k locations, more recent stories have also expanded its history backwards, giving it an origin which is quite unlike any other planet in the Imperium. And with Armageddon once more being brought to the forefront of the story, I thought it might be useful to go through the backstory of the planet and recap the many famed wars that have been fought across its surface. Not only the three famous ones, which of course are only two famous ones in world, but also the ones that happened long before and are now lost to Imperial memory. All of these conflicts are complex and are worthy of a video in their own right. At the time of writing, I've only retold the full story of two of them. So for now, I'm just going to recap all of them, briefly explain why they were important, and build a history of one of the most hotly contested worlds in the Imperium. Armageddon is one of the most famous hive worlds in the galaxy and a vital linchpin for the Imperial military machine. It's a world of manufacturing and industry, much of it geared towards the production of weapons, armoured vehicles and munitions for the Imperial Guards. So much so that the planet is the industrial hub for not only its own Armageddon sector, but for that entire region of the galaxy. Few other Imperial worlds can compete with it in terms of the sheer magnitude of goods produced. In particular, the millions of las guns and chimera transports that roll out of its manufactorums. Millennia of such industry has of course turned its two primary landmasses into a toxic wasteland. Like many hive worlds, the land between the hives has been ravaged by industrial pollution and over-mining, and much of the surface is little more than barren ash wastes, only broken by a line of equatorial jungles that separates the primary continent into two halves, now called Armageddon Prime and Armageddon Secundus. But to be honest, it was hardly a paradise before this. The fire wastes to the north were always practically uninhabitable, and between the rocky wasteland and the humid and dangerous jungles, it was never a very hospitable world. But of course, that sort of thing didn't really matter to the planet's original inhabitants, because before the planet was called Armageddon, it had a different, equally infamous name: Ullanor, the home of one of the largest orc empires of the Great Crusade. At the time of the Great Crusade, the world of Ullanor lay to the north of the Segmentum Tempestus and was the centre of one of the greatest orc empires in the galaxy. Orcs had been a consistent threat to the rest of the galaxy for millions of years, and when the Age of Strife ended and the warp storms that plagued galactic travel came down, they'd been quick to expand, almost as quick as the Imperium, forming new wars and orky empires that resisted the expansion of the new Imperium of Man at every turn. The greatest of these was the Empire of Urlak-Urg, centred on the world of Ullanor Prime in the Ullanor system, the largest orc empire thus encountered by humanity, and near the end of the Great Crusade, with many other alien threats exterminated and the conquest of the galaxy almost done, the Emperor brought his armies to it. The Ullanor campaign was incredibly famous, considered a pivotal point of the late Great Crusade. The Lunar Wolves, White Scars and Ultramarine legions led a massed assault on the Empire, with overall command given to Horus Lupercal of the Lunar Wolves, who made great use of his famous spear tip strategy. 100,000 Astartes, leading a force of over 8 million army soldiers, delivered aboard 600 Imperial starships. But greater than all of that, it was the last time the Emperor himself took to the field of battle. He fought across the campaign, fighting back-to-back with Horus during the climactic final battle, during which Horus saved the Emperor's life and then led his Justarin to the top of the great Tower of Ullanor, where he slew the Orc overlord in single combat. The death of Erg spelled the end for his empire, which devolved into a series of petty warlords that were easily swept up by Imperial task forces, but the victory was much more important symbolically. With the destruction of Erg's empire, the Imperium stood unchallenged in the galaxy. The last great alien threat had been defeated, and in celebration, the Emperor declared a great triumph. The Mechanicum planed a continent flat for the event, leaving only one road, a highway studded on either side with the skulls of dead orcs, and only one structure, a triumphal platform and pavilion for the Emperor and his sons. Millions of guardsmen stood in serried ranks, supported by hundreds of thousands of Astartes. A full 14 of the 18 legions were represented that day, and every soldier who fought in the campaign received the Ullanor triumphal bar for their uniform, made from the recast bolter shells used in the war. All of this was overseen by the Emperor himself and 9 of his primarchs, and it was here that the Emperor declared his withdrawal from the crusade. Now the Orcs had been defeated, he could retire to concentrate on other projects, and appointed Horus Lupercal War Master of the Imperium, and of course, we all know how that turned out. But Ullanor was left a ruin, ignored for the rest of the heresy, the triumphal platform and pavilion left to the ages. But Ullanor seems to have had a particular connection to the Orcoid species. It's been speculated that it might have been some sort of homeworld, though as an engineered species one wonders exactly what that means, but it's clear that the defeat of Ullanor certainly reverberated through the collective Orcish psyche as they would be drawn back there again and again. The planet would become the site of more invasions 1,500 years later during the War of the Beast. The Horus Heresy, the scouring that followed, and the consolidation of the new Imperium had given many previously broken Xenos species a chance to recover, and in 544 M32, the Imperium came under attack by a series of Orc moons that teleported into orbit around various planets, even reaching as far as Terra itself. The attack moons turned out to be the vanguard of the colossal War Beast, led by a mysterious Orc warlord known only as the Beast, who'd managed to build a war so powerful that Orc technology and society briefly evolved far further than it ever had done before. The attack moons used teleporter technology on a scale never before seen. Eventually, the centre of this new Orc threat was traced back to Ullanor, which had been repopulated by Orcs who had built a great new temple city, Gorkogrod, on the site of the original Triumph, the largest city on a planet that was covered by now in ramshackle but surprisingly organised Orc settlements, protected by force fields and studied with teleporter devices. It was clear that Ullanor was being converted into an attack planet. The War of the Beast would see 3 more Imperial invasions of Ullanor. The first invasion, led by the assembled Space Marine chapters of the Last Wall, those are the chapters that were descended from the old Imperial Fist Legion and commanded by the Primarch Vulcan of the Salamanders, succeeded in landing a vast invasion force and eventually bringing ruin to Gorkogrod after a horrific rate of attrition. It ended with Vulcan fighting the Beast in single combat, eventually detonating his own weapons to apparently kill them both. And with the death of the Beast, the Imperial forces retreated to orbit, but that wasn't the end of it. When Orc attacks resumed soon after, a second invasion was directed at the planet, this time led by Lord Commander Courland, the last remaining Imperial Fist, and assisted by the newly recovered Sisters of Silence. But the second invasion ended in disaster when it was discovered that there was not just another replacement beast, but in fact 6 giant prime orc-sized beasts controlling the war. Courland was killed in the invasion and the Imperial forces routed. It would take a third invasion to finish the war, this time led by the chapter master of the Fist's Exemplar, Maximus Thane, and using the orcs' tactics against them. Ullanor was battered into submission by redirected asteroids before being invaded by a repurposed Imperial attack moon with the aid of a captured Orc Weird Boy and some anti-psychic shenanigans by the Sisters of Silence, and the Beast of Beasts was finally defeated. In the wake of the War of the Beast, Thane tasked Mechanicus forces under Fabricator General Kubik with the destruction of the entire planet, lest a third Orc Empire arise, but the advanced technology that littered the surface proved a little too much of a temptation. While Kubik dutifully reported back that the planet's technology had been used to move it into the center of a massive star, in truth, the planet had been teleported to an uninhabited system on the northern edge of the Segmentum Solar, where the Mechanicus could quietly ransack it for its Xenos technology. And shortly after, once the Mechanicus had left the new location, Imperial colonization fleets reached the empty system where they found this planet in orbit around the local star, now the fourth planet in the system, which was eventually populated and given the name Armageddon. Armageddon 4, or merely Armageddon, would eventually grow into the hive world of the 41st millennium, thousands of years of industry and construction weathering away any trace of its ancient origins. But despite everything, the planet still seemed to call out to the Orcs, or at least one particular Orc. But before we get there, we need to talk about some other invaders. In the 41st millennium, the planet of Armageddon, now a vital linchpin of Imperial defense, would come under attack 3 times. But the first war for Armageddon is all but unknown to Imperial records because its invaders were not Orcs at all, but the demonic forces of chaos under the demon Primarch of Khorne, Angron. On 444 M41, the Armageddon augurs detected a vast warp surge on the system's edge as a massive space hulk broke from the warp. By this point, the planet was a well-populated hive world, its productive area split between the two halves of its main landmass, Armageddon Prime and Armageddon Secundus. The hives were fortified and well defended by the famed mechanized infantry of the Armageddon Steel Legion, and the system itself had orbital defenses and its own small picket fleet operating out of the naval facility at St. John's Dock. But that wouldn't be enough to stop what had appeared. The demon Primarch Angron, uniting his forces on a scale not seen since their sundering at Scalathrax, had boarded the Hulk Devourer of Stars, and with warp storms building in the local area, it had been thrown out at Armageddon, surrounded by swarms of twisted demon vessels. The Khornate forces battered their way through the defences, quickly overwhelming Armageddon Prime as various cults arose across its hives, and were only stopped when a lull in the warp storms, caused partly by Angron's forces pausing to build shrines to Khorne, allowed the Space Wolves to reach the planet under the command of their newly elevated Great Wolf, Logan and Grimnar. And Grimnar called in even more reinforcements, leading to a deployment of Grey Knights and Inquisitors arriving in orbit. I have an entire video on the details of the war here, but in short, Grimnar was able to rally the defenders along the rivers Styx and Charon, countering the Khornate forces that emerged from the equatorial jungles as the Grey Knights teleported directly into combat with Angron, eventually banishing him. But the war is infamous for its aftermath as much as its prosecution. The Inquisition attempted to restrict any knowledge of chaos from spreading by killing the survivors and repopulating the world, including killing any defending Steel Legion that survived the war. They were stopped by Grimnar and the Space Wolves, who considered this grossly dishonourable and interposed their fleet, allowing the surviving guard transports to escape. What followed was a period known as the Months of Shame, as the Grey Knights attempted to hunt down the survivors and the Space Wolves attempted to protect them. The whole affair came dangerously close to civil war and was only stopped when Grimnar killed not only a number of senior Grey Knights, but the leader of the inquisitorial delegation in orbit around Fenris. Of course, in the common record of the Imperium, neither the original war nor the Months of Shame ever happened. The second war for Armageddon, the first one to be widely known in the Imperium, started in 941 M41 and would see its most famous invader rise to power for the first time. Ghazghkull Magaruk Thraka began his mushroomy life as a young boy on the Orc world of Urk in the Golgothan Wastes, a wilderness area near the galactic core that had long been plagued by Orc invasions. A head injury early on granted him with what he believed to be the ability to receive visions from the Orky gods, Gork and Mork, and when a lone Space Hulk passed through the system, he managed to unite 5 tribes of Orcs under his banner and hitch a ride. Ghazghkull emerged on the fringes of the Armageddon system, where it was immediately spotted by the local augurs, but instead of calling for aid, the governor of Armageddon at the time, Hermann von Straub, insisted that this wasn't an issue. He refused to broadcast any distress signals or any calls for aid, not only unwilling to admit that his great house needed help, but but confident that the military powerhouse of Armageddon could handle whatever was coming. He was, of course, wrong. The Hulk blasted its way through the defended picket lines and made landings, the 5 tribes spreading out across the 2 continents and pushing the defenders back at every turn. Thankfully, one person did spot the real danger. Commissar Sebastian Yarrick was already by this point a veteran, due for retirement when the first orcs landed, but after observing their tactics, he noticed something was unusual about their leadership and co-opted the local astropathic tower into sending a distress signal. For this gross betrayal, von Straub exiled him to Hades Hive for the duration of the war, while he conducted a largely useless campaign of piecemeal attacks, ignoring any advice until he was forced to concede Armageddon Prime and fall back to Tartarus Hive in Secundus. But as the war went on, it was the remote Hades Hive that became the linchpin. Yarrick pulled together the ragtag defenders and conducted a masterful defense, even fighting the first war boss who assaulted the city in single combat. He lost an arm doing that, but knowing the way the orc psyche worked, he took the war boss's power claw as a replacement. Over time, the entire orc assault focused itself on Hades, Garzakel himself taking command of the siege, and this pulled orc forces from all the other fronts, so much so that when the Space Marine reinforcements from the Blood Angels, Ultramarines and Salamanders arrived, under the overall control of Lord Commander Dante, they were able to effectively mop up the straggling orcs and concentrate on the force assaulting Hades. The Space Marines put the orcs to flight on Secundus, while a massed army of squats, kin of the Leagues from nearby Golgotha, hot on the trail of the orcs, landed on Armageddon Prime and slowly exterminated the tribes still there. Hades was of course left a ruin, but while it was Dante who led the rescue, it was Commissar Yarrick who was recognized as the hero of the war, the hero of Hades Hive. Von Straub, of course, disappeared, his speeder found destroyed on the highways outside Tartarus. Garzakel left the planet with the remains of his war in tatters, but this didn't seem to bother him much. The voices in his head insisted that that was just a trial run, a test, and in the following years he led numerous raids on nearby Imperial worlds, intent on understanding better the way Humies fought until he was ready to try again. In the aftermath of the Second War, Armageddon was reinforced and was placed under the rule of a military council, given its importance to local Imperial war efforts. These reinforcements would of course be tested 57 years later, when Garzakel returned in command of a vast orc fleet. He'd led a destructive path through nearby sectors for decades, invading the world of Piscina 4 and then moving on to the squat-held world of Golgotha in an alliance with the Bad Moon war boss Nazdreg Ud-Erdgrub. In fact, on Golgotha he managed to capture his pursuer Yarrick, torturing him before eventually letting him go, since he wanted to assault Armageddon again and he wanted to make sure Yarrick would be there to ensure that he got a good fight. This time, with the planet under the overall command of General Kurov of the Steel Legion, the calls for reinforcement were swift, and as the colossal orc fleet moved in, system Imperial forces started to arrive. The Black Templars, Salamanders and Raptors, along with many other chapters, responded in force, and for the first time in decades, the old man of Hades, Yarrick, set foot on Armageddon. Kurov immediately ceded his command to the hero of Hades Hive. The orc fleet was engaged in the void by Battle Fleet Armageddon and by the Black Templars fleet under the overall command of High Marshal Helbrecht, but the orcs outnumbered the defenders 6-1 and many ships made it through, in particular a vast number of retrofitted asteroids, rocks. The orcs' first target was of course the ruins of Hades Hive, the main point of resistance last time, which was pulverized further from orbit just to make sure it was still dead. But rocks landed everywhere, and teleporter technology, invented by the mad mech Orchimedes, allowed the landed rocks to teleport more orcs in from orbit, and those then allied with tribes of feral orcs which had been slowly growing in the jungles since the last war. Fighting swept the entire planet, while Yarrick attempted to forge the PDF, the Steel Legion, and the various other Imperial armies into a unified force. The epicenter moved from Acheron Hive to Vulcanus Hive when Acheron fell to insurrection. The old commander, von Straub, along with Blood Axe commandos and the support of the old nobility, took over and then pledged the Hive to the orcs. Von Straub would eventually be killed by a crack team from the 13th Penal Legion, the Last Chancers, but the loss of the Hive was a sore blow to the defenders. Fighting also spread through the equatorial jungles, where dedicated regiments of Armageddon orc hunters competed with Catachan jungle fighters and the space marines of the salamanders, raptors and celestial lions to contain the feral orc tribes and form some sort of firebreak between the two inhabited continents. One notable point of resistance during the war was Hive Hell's Reach, held by Chaplain Grimaldus of the Black Templars, who managed to resurrect the ancient Ordinatus Armageddon, a relic from the First War that was buried under the ash wastes, and used it to resist the assault of orc gargants. He eventually commanded a last-ditch defence around the Hive's ancient cathedral. The whole planet resisted at every turn until the war became a stalemate, a grinding conflict that ate up both sides, and eventually Ghazghkull became bored, deciding that his prophecies had been, wrong. He left the planet to begin the Great War across the galaxy at roughly the same time as Armageddon's infamous volcanic season of fire stopped many of the offensives and the most intense phase of the war petered out. The third war for Armageddon, obviously the second to the Imperials, had ended, but the after effects carried on. Ghazghkull had once again escaped, pursued by the Black Templars and Yarrick again, but fighting against the random orc tribes loose on the planet continued, bleeding the defenders dry over years, and smaller orc wars continued to flock to the planet, called there by some unknown orky power. The planet now seen by the orcs as Ragnarok, a reliable place for a good scrap. This war on Armageddon would continue, albeit at a lower level, until the spread of the Great Rift, which once again ignited the latent warp storms around the system. And as a note, it's unclear if any of this is still counted as the Third War or as something new. The fighting never really stopped, but anyway. Just as the orcs had been confined to the ruins of the Lost Hives and the equatorial jungles, the Great Rift spread across the galaxy, and in its wake, cults and demonic incursions once again spread across the world. For a time, cults loyal to both Tzeentch and Khorne fought, and the whole system and nearby worlds were riddled with warp magic and violent chaos renegades. It was said that half of Armageddon was transformed into a demon world for at least a time, which might have been hyperbole, but eventually it seems that Khorne took the lead as the early era Indomitus saw a fresh assault by Angron. During the Season of Blood, chaos cults, originally spurred on by a demagogue who arose against the Orc Hunter detachments, succeeded in reactivating chaos shrines along the Fire Coast and in the deep jungles, and raising considerable support amongst the local PDF. When Hive Thoradis fell to the heretics, the commander of the defending Steel Legion sabotaged the Hive's power cores to deny it to the enemy, causing so much destruction that the most prominent chaos shrine, the Red Angel's Gate, swelled and opened, and Angron was drawn back to the planet at the head of a vast World Eater's armada. He was contested by strike forces from the Black Templars and Grey Knights, both of whom had defended Armageddon before, though in different wars, as well as a mass deployment of Krieg guardsmen. This time, the Black Templars and Kriegers bore the brunt of the fighting as Chaos forces capitalized on the fallen Hives and landed vast cultist armies, trench lines springing up across Secundus. The short invasion was eventually ended by an Imperial mission to the Fire Wastes, led by the Grey Knights, where Angron was once again banished by the sacrifice of Grandmaster Morvans, and the gate was sealed again. The planet was once again left a ruin, with more hives destroyed and precious little of the native Steel Legion and PDF left in fighting shape. There were even questions over Armageddon's continuing viability as a manufactorum. However, it seems there's no end to the troubles on the planet, as, while constant chaos incursions are still being put down, another orc invasion is lurking on the horizon. That was all the wars of Armageddon so far, but the narrative seems to be shifting back there as the speed boss Wazdaka Gutsmeg is drawn to the planet for his own slice of action, and the Blood Angels, absent since the Second War, return to defend the world. I will, of course, relay the events as they happen, but at least now you have a little context for the many, definitely more than 3 wars for Armageddon. Anyway, go Ragnarok, what to you all, and thanks for watching. And if you'd like more videos about the various campaigns of the 41st Millennium, well, there should be another one popping up to the right there. And if you'd like to support the channel, well, you can join the Patreon or the YouTube membership scheme, you can buy merch from the merch store, or of course, you can like and subscribe. Details for all of that are in the thing below. See ya.